July 3, 1971, Paris, France. Pamela Courson woke up alone. She found Jim Morrison in the bathtub of their apartment on Rue Beautreillis. He was 27 years old. He was dead. No autopsy was ever performed, no toxicology report, no official investigation. The death certificate listed heart failure. The body remained in the bathtub for 72 hours before the undertakers arrived. Morrison was buried 4 days later in Père Lachaise Cemetery before most of the world even knew he was gone. Manzarek, Robby Krieger, John Densmore. The three men who had built the Doors alongside him, who had played every show, recorded every album, survived every arrest and every riot, and every night when Morrison showed up so far gone he could barely stand. Found out by phone. Three musicians in Los Angeles. Told that the person their entire creative identity was built around was in the ground in Paris. Without Jim, Densmore said years later, what is the Doors? It was not a rhetorical question. It was the question that would define the rest of their lives. This is the story of the Doors, the band that changed what rock and roll was allowed to say and do and be, and the man who made that possible, who chose deliberately and consistently to destroy himself. And what happened to the three men he left behind.
Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night out. Fire!
Los Angeles, 1965. Jim Morrison was the son of a United States Navy admiral. That detail matters, not because Morrison was defined by his father, but because he spent his entire adult life running from him. From the discipline, the authority, the expectation of conformity, the naval officer's world where you followed orders and kept your mouth shut and never said the unsayable in public. Morrison studied film at UCLA, not music, film. He was interested in images, in poetry, in the space between words where something true could hide if you were brave enough to look for it. He was not, by conventional measures, a musician. He had no formal training. He could not play an instrument. What he had was something rarer and more dangerous. A voice that sounded like it was coming from somewhere older than rock and roll, and a mind that saw connection between ancient mythology, French symbolist poetry, William Blake, and the American highway that nobody else was making in 1965. He met Manzarek on Venice Beach. Manzarek was a classically trained keyboard player from Chicago, technically gifted, musically sophisticated, the exact opposite of Morrison in almost every way. Morrison recited some of his poetry. Manzarek heard something in it. If we got a band together, Manzarek told him, we could make $1 million. Morrison laughed, but he said yes. They named themselves after Aldous Huxley's book about mescaline, The Doors of Perception, a reference to William Blake. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. Guitarist Robby Krieger and drummer John Densmore joined. 4 people, 1 vision. And from the very beginning, the understanding that the vision belonged to one of them more than the others. If stories like this are your thing, hit subscribe. We dig deep into the rise, the fall, and the moment it all went wrong every single week. You don't want to miss what's coming next. The Sunset Strip, 1966 to 1967. The Doors played the Whiskey a Go-Go until the club owner fired them mid-set. Morrison had improvised an Oedipal section into the end, explicit, disturbing, unlike anything anyone had ever performed on a pop stage, and the club owner had heard enough. They were signed to Elektra Records. Their debut album arrived in January 1967, Break On Through, Soul Kitchen, The Crystal Ship, The End. Then Light My Fire, written primarily by Robby Krieger, was edited from its full length to a single. It went to number 1 in July 1967.
Girl, we couldn't get much higher. Come on, baby, light my fire.
The Doors were suddenly the most controversial band in America. Ed Sullivan wanted them on his show. His producers told Morrison not to sing the line, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," a clear drug reference. Morrison agreed to change it, then sang it anyway, live, in front of millions of people. The Sullivan Show banned them permanently. This was not an accident. This was not a young man losing control in the moment. This was Jim Morrison making a deliberate choice about what kind of artist he was going to be and what kind of rules he was going to follow. The answer, increasingly, as the years went on, was none of them. Between 1967 and 1969, The Doors released 4 albums: Strange Days, Waiting for the Sun, The Soft Parade, Morrison Hotel, each one finding a different balance between Morrison's literary ambitions and the commercial pressure of being one of the biggest rock bands in America. Morrison was simultaneously 2 things that were difficult to hold together. He was a genuine poet, a reader of Rimbaud and Nietzsche and Blake, a man who cared deeply about language and meaning and the difference between art that told the truth and art that simply told people what they wanted to hear. And he was a performer who had discovered that the most powerful thing he could do on a stage was dissolve the boundary between performer and audience completely. To become something that the people watching couldn't look away from even when, especially when, they were frightened. The leather pants, the improvised poetry between songs, the shows where he would stand at the microphone and not sing, just stare at the audience until the silence became unbearable. These were not the actions of a man who had lost control. They were the actions of a man who understood control perfectly and had decided to demonstrate what happened when it was surrendered. But something else was happening simultaneously: the drinking. Morrison had always drunk, but by 1968 it was something different, something that was no longer a choice he was making, but a thing that was making choices for him. Shows where he couldn't finish songs, shows where he sat down on stage and refused to stand. Shows where he showed up so impaired, the band played around him hoping nobody would notice. The 3 men who shared a stage with him noticed: Densmore, Krieger, Manzarek. 3 musicians watching their lead singer dismantle himself in real time, powerless to stop it because the thing that was destroying him was also the thing that made him extraordinary. His willingness to go further than anyone else, to take every risk, to feel every feeling, to live as close to the edge as a human being could live without falling off. The edge was getting closer. December 9th, 1967, New Haven, Connecticut. Morrison was backstage with a young woman before the show. A police officer found them, told them to leave. Morrison told the police officer what he thought of that instruction. The officer maced him. Morrison went on stage, told the audience exactly what had happened, in explicit detail. The police arrested him on stage in front of a sold-out crowd. He was charged with indecent and immoral exhibition and breach of peace. That was 1967. By March 1969, Morrison had been drinking heavily for months. The Doors performed at Dinner Key Auditorium in Miami. What exactly happened that night depends on who you ask. Morrison later said the crowd was so hot and loud that he just wanted to talk to them, to slow everything down, to make something real happen instead of just another rock concert. What the audience and the police saw was a performer who appeared intoxicated, exposed himself on stage, and incited the crowd. Morrison was charged with lewd and lascivious behavior, indecent exposure, open profanity, and public drunkenness. He faced up to 3 years in prison. The Doors stopped touring. Radio stations stopped playing their music. The band that had been one of the most successful in America was suddenly radioactive. And Jim Morrison, facing federal charges, facing prison, was in the worst shape of his life. 1970. The trial dragged on. Morrison was convicted of indecent exposure and open profanity. His lawyers filed appeals. While waiting for the legal process to resolve, the Doors went back into the studio. LA Woman, January 1971. Something extraordinary happened. Morrison arrived sober, on time, prepared. The album they made in those sessions was unlike anything they had done before. Raw, bluesy, stripped back, honest. Riders on the Storm, Love Her Madly, LA Woman. It sounded like a man who had made peace with something, or was trying to. Densmore said the sessions were the best they had ever worked together. That Morrison seemed present in a way he hadn't been in years. The album was released in April 1971. Jim Morrison never heard the reviews. In March 1971, before the album even came out, he had left for Paris. He told the band he needed to write, to get away from the legal trouble, to clear his head. Krieger said later, "When Jim went to Paris, I figured he'd be back at some point and we'd start playing again. He was wrong." July 3, 1971. Pamela Courson found him in the bathtub, called a doctor. The doctor noted heart failure. No autopsy, no investigation. Morrison was 27 years old. He was buried on July 7th in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, alongside Oscar Wilde, Frédéric Chopin, Edith Piaf. The three remaining Doors found out by phone. They had not been told he was sick. They had not been told he was in danger. One day he was in Paris writing poetry. The next day he was gone. Manzarek, Krieger, and Densmore tried to continue. They auditioned replacement singers. They tried singing themselves. Densmore's question hung over everything. Without Jim, what is the Doors? In 1973, they released 2 more albums without Morrison. Both failed commercially. Both felt like exactly what they were: 3 musicians trying to fill a space that had never been about music. The Doors dissolved. But the dissolution was only the beginning of a different kind of story. Jim Morrison had been dead for 30 years when the Doors began fighting over what his name was worth. Manzarek and Krieger formed a touring band. They called it the Doors of the 21st Century. They played the Doors catalog.
We couldn't get much higher. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire.
They performed Light My Fire and Riders on the Storm with a singer who was not Jim Morrison. John Densmore refused to join. He sued them. Densmore argued that using the Doors name without all surviving original members was a violation of their partnership agreement, a legal exploitation of Jim Morrison's legacy, something Morrison himself would never have sanctioned. The court agreed. Manzarek and Krieger were ordered to stop using the Doors name for their touring band. They renamed it Riders on the Storm, then Strange Days, then kept searching for a name that worked. None of them worked, because the name that worked was the Doors. And the Doors required Jim Morrison, which was exactly Densmore's point. Manzarek and Krieger wanted the catalog, the income, the legacy, the songs, to keep playing them for audiences who wanted to hear them. Densmore wanted something more complicated. He wanted to protect what the Doors had been, something that couldn't exist without the person who defined it. "I was protecting Jim's legacy," Densmore said. "I was protecting what we created together." Manzarek died of bile duct cancer in 2013. He was 74. 2 men who had played together since 1965, who had made Light My Fire and Riders on the Storm and The End, who had watched Jim Morrison destroy himself from 3 feet away and kept playing anyway, ended their lives in a legal dispute about a name. Jim Morrison didn't destroy the Doors. He destroyed himself, deliberately, methodically, over years, in a way that suggested he understood exactly what he was doing and had decided it was the price of being the kind of artist he wanted to be. The Doors died because they were built around something that couldn't be replaced or replicated or toured without. Not Morrison's voice, not his leather pants, not his willingness to be arrested on stage, his willingness to mean it. Every other performer who has ever tried to channel Jim Morrison has been performing the idea of Jim Morrison. The original thing, the actual thing, was a specific person at a specific moment who was genuinely willing to go further than anyone thought was possible. That thing existed once. It lasted 4 years. It left behind 8 albums and a grave in Paris, and 3 men who spent the rest of their lives trying to figure out what to do with the wreckage. Densmore put it the most honestly. He was supposed to be a shooting star, a quick impact, and then goodbye. Goodbye happened on July 3, 1971. Everything since then has been the echo. What's your memory of the Doors? Drop it in the comments below, and if you want more stories about the moments that changed music forever, subscribe to What Killed the Band. We'll see you in the next one.